My wife left me for a man who claimed to be a millionaire real estate CEO. She packed her things in one afternoon, kissed me on the cheek like it was just another Tuesday, and said, "Don't wait up. I've found my soulmate." Funny thing is, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just asked if she wanted the espresso machine too. My name is Ethan, and no, this isn't the story of a man chasing after a cheating wife. This is the story of what happens when you let someone run straight into their own fantasy, and how watching them fall can sometimes be the most liberating thing you'll ever experience. Because sometimes love doesn't end in heartbreak. Sometimes it ends in clarity. She thought she traded up. She thought she found her forever. She thought I'd be waiting on the porch, heart in hand, when it all came crashing down. She was wrong on all counts. And I was finally free to become someone she never imagined I'd be. I met Lana during our sophomore year at the University of Michigan. She was studying architecture and I was majoring in business administration. She had this quiet confidence about her. Never the loudest in the room, but always the one who left an impression. I remember the first time I saw her sketching on the quad lawn. Her lines were precise, her eyes locked on the page like nothing else in the world existed. I sat next to her with a burrito and managed to start a conversation. That day turned into a week, that week into a semester, and before I knew it, she was part of my everyday life. Lana wasn't just smart, she was driven. She talked about designing sustainable cities and winning awards for her future firm. I loved that about her. She made me want to be better, to build something with her. So I did. I applied for an internship and picked up a night shift job at a logistics company just so I could afford to take her out and help cover our shared rent when we moved in together. She always said I was the most dependable person she'd ever met. After graduation, we moved to Chicago. She got into a competitive master's program for architecture while I worked full-time in finance. I barely slept that year. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry, handled bills, and made sure Lana had everything she needed so she could focus on school. It wasn't a sacrifice to me. It felt like investing in our future. We got married at the courthouse, nothing fancy, just us, her sister, and my best friend Jared. Lana didn't want the stress of a big wedding, and I was happy with whatever made her happy. I thought we were a team. Things felt stable at first. We had Sunday routines, lazy Saturday brunches, Netflix marathons. I even learned to like oat milk lattes because she read somewhere that dairy was clogging her creative energy. I laughed, but I drank them. We were just solid. When she got her first real job at a mid-sized architecture firm, we celebrated with champagne on the fire escape. I still remember the way she looked that night, barefoot, bottle in hand, hair a mess from the summer breeze. She kissed me and said, "We're going to build an empire, you and me." And I believed her. Over time, I noticed she started talking more about impact and legacy. She wanted more. I did too, but I thought we'd take our time. She didn't want to wait. She started going to networking events alone, saying I wouldn't fit in with the crowd. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her. I still remember the moment she brought home a glossy brochure from an exclusive real estate developer's gala she'd attended. "These people are visionaries," she said. "They don't just build, they inspire." That's when she mentioned a man named Mason Rivera. At the time, he was just a name, just another ambitious face in her growing circle. I didn't realize then that my wife was already halfway out the door. Looking back, I think that's when the shift truly began. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as ambition or excitement, but something in her tone had changed. She spoke about Mason's ideas like they were gospel. I asked if she wanted to bring him over for dinner sometime, just to get to know who she was working with so closely. She laughed it off. "He's too busy changing skylines," she said. Still, I supported her. When she suggested we take money from our savings so she could attend a luxury design retreat Mason was sponsoring in Aspen, I said yes. I believed in her vision. I believed in us. The irony is, I never once doubted her intentions, not when she started coming home later, not when she began spending weekends collaborating on a passion project. I'd make dinner and wait up, only to fall asleep on the couch, cold plate untouched on the coffee table. I told myself this was just a phase, that once her project took off, things would return to normal, that we'd find our rhythm again. But love doesn't fade overnight. It erodes, grain by grain, until one day you wake up next to a stranger and wonder when exactly you stopped being seen. I didn't know it then, but the woman I had once built my life around was already chasing someone else entirely. The signs were always there, I just didn't want to see them. At first, it was little things. Lana stopped laughing at my jokes. She used to find my dry humor hilarious, now it was met with silence or an eye roll. Our once effortless conversations became strained, filled with long pauses or shallow comments about work. If I asked about her day, I'd get fine or tiring before she buried herself in her phone. Then came the comparisons. You should really take notes from Mason, she said one night after I mentioned maybe changing departments at work. He's not afraid to take risks. That's how people get ahead. It stung, but I nodded. I wanted to be supportive, but support started to feel like self-erasure. She criticized my clothes, my job, my goals, or lack thereof, as she put it. I remember one dinner when I told her I'd been promoted, she barely looked up from her salad and muttered, "That's cute," before switching topics to Mason's visionary real estate models. She spent more nights away. Sometimes she claimed she was working late, other times that she was at industry events. I once surprised her at one of those events with flowers. She was visibly annoyed. "This isn't prom, Ethan," she whispered harshly before excusing herself to rejoin Mason's group across the room. I stood there with a bouquet in my hand, surrounded by strangers in tailored suits and practiced smiles. I left without saying goodbye. When she did come home, she'd be drained, distant. We stopped eating together. She took her meals in the office or on the balcony, scrolling her phone. Our bedroom became just a room with two bed sheets. Touch disappeared. I can't even remember the last time she kissed me without it feeling transactional. The worst part, she made me feel small for caring. One morning, I brought up how disconnected I felt. I told her I missed us. She sighed, looked up from her laptop and said, "You're too sensitive, Ethan. Honestly, it's exhausting." That's when I realized my pain had become an inconvenience to her. Jared noticed. He came by one evening, saw how quiet the apartment was, how Lana barely acknowledged me after she left the room. He asked, "Man, are you okay? This doesn't look like love." But I wasn't ready to hear that. I defended her, said she was just stressed, that work was overwhelming, that she just needed space. Deep down, I knew better. I started spending more time outside the apartment. I'd wander bookstores, sip coffee alone, sometimes just walk until the city lights blurred. I felt invisible in my own marriage, like a placeholder in someone else's fantasy. Then came the birthday dinner. I had planned it for weeks, reservations at her favorite place, a gift I knew she'd love, even picked out an outfit she once said made me look classy but not try hard. She didn't show. I called, texted, nothing. At midnight, she walked in, heels in hand, eyes glassy. "Sorry," she said, brushing past me. "Things ran late." No apology, no explanation, just that cold, practiced indifference. That night, I sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling, realizing something horrifying. I was holding on to a version of Lana that didn't exist anymore. From that night on, I stopped trying to plan anything. I stopped sharing little wins at work or asking her about her day. Conversations became transactional, bills, groceries, whether the doorman had signed for a package. What scared me most wasn't the silence. It was how comfortable we had both become in it. One Saturday, I found a book on our coffee table titled Manifesting Power Partnerships. It was filled with scribbles and highlighted quotes. One page had a note in her handwriting. True alignment equals shared ambition. I didn't see my name anywhere. I didn't see us. I confronted her once, not angrily, just honestly. I asked her if she still saw a future with me. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stared for a long second and said, I don't know, Ethan. Maybe we've just grown apart. Grown apart, like our love was a pair of shoes she'd outgrown. I slept on the couch that night. I told myself it was temporary, but deep down I knew we weren't partners anymore. I was just an accessory to her narrative and not even a useful one at that. It happened on a Wednesday. Lana had just come back from a weekend retreat in Napa Valley with her colleagues. She smelt like expensive perfume and foreign cologne. I was sitting on the couch, half watching a basketball game when she dropped her bag by the door and said, "We need to talk." My stomach sank. She didn't ease into it. There was no apology, no lead up, just a flat, "I'm leaving." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I've met someone," she said. "It's Mason." I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that never came. "You're serious?" He nodded. "He understands me. He sees me." I laughed, more out of disbelief than humor. "He's your boss. He's a visionary. He challenges me." I wanted to scream, to ask how she could throw away everything we'd built. But all I could manage was, "We're married, Lana." She looked down. "I know, but this isn't working. You're too safe, too comfortable. I need more." She packed her things in under an hour. I stood there, numb, as she folded our life into 2 suitcases. She didn't cry. She didn't even seem conflicted. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "Don't hate me for chasing my dream." Then she was gone. At first, I thought it was temporary, that she'd realize Mason was just a phase, that she'd come home. And she didn't. 2 weeks later, I saw them together on Instagram, smiling in Santorini, champagne glasses in hand. The caption read, "To new beginnings with my soulmate." Soulmate. The word hit me like a brick to the chest. I wanted to call her, to scream, to beg, but I didn't. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate cereal for dinner. I existed. Then came the bank alerts. I noticed large withdrawals from our joint savings account. I called the bank, only to be told Lana had transferred money to a company under Mason's name. When I confronted her via email, she responded, "It was for a shared business venture. I'll pay you back." I contacted a lawyer the next day. The divorce was quick, clean, cold. She didn't contest anything. It was like she couldn't wait to sever the last tie that bound us. I moved out of our apartment and into a tiny 1-bedroom near the train tracks. The walls were thin and the radiator hissed at night, but at least it was mine. The real punch came a month later. Jared sent me a link to a business expose. The headline read, "Luxury real estate mogul Mason Rivera under investigation for fraud." Read every word. Turns out Mason wasn't a CEO. He wasn't even licensed. He'd created fake portfolios, staged luxury properties, and lured investors into shell projects. Lana's shared business venture was one of many scams he'd spun. I stared at the article for a long time, heart thudding. My wife had left me for a con artist. I wanted to call her again. Not to mock, not to accuse, just to ask, "Did you know?" But I didn't. Because some truths don't need witnesses. The last time I saw Lana, she was standing in front of our old building, talking to someone on the phone. She looked tired. Not physically, but in her eyes. That kind of exhaustion that comes from chasing something that never wanted to be caught. She saw me. I nodded. She looked away. And just like that, we were strangers again. I spent hours replaying every conversation, every moment that could have hinted at this disaster. How had I not seen through him, through her? But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those we trust with the softest parts of ourselves. I talked to Jared about the article. He tried to keep his voice calm, but I could hear the rage simmering. She threw away a good man for a LinkedIn scammer. I chuckled, but it was hollow. Lana's friends stopped reaching out. Some sent me vague messages like thinking of you or hope you're okay, but no one stayed. She and Mason had been a glamorous couple, the kind that drew attention. Once his empire crumbled, so did the illusions. The part that haunted me most wasn't that she chose him, it was how easily she discarded me, as if our years together were a stepping stone to someone shinier. One night, I opened a box of our wedding photos. I stared at one in particular. Us at the courthouse, her hand in mine, grinning like idiots. I tried to remember what that version of her felt like. I couldn't. It was like trying to recall the voice of someone who died. She didn't just betray me, she erased me. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Lana. It was short. I didn't expect it to go this way. I'm sorry for hurting you. I thought I was doing what was right for me. I hope one day you'll understand. No return address, no apology for the money, just a vague attempt at closure sealed in expensive stationery. I burned it because I didn't need closure. I needed distance. I needed to rebuild, not to forgive, not to forget, but to reclaim the pieces of me I'd given away too freely. And that's when the healing, however slow, truly began. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice things I had ignored for years. How much of myself I'd bent to make her comfortable. How often I'd silenced my instincts to keep the peace. Her betrayal forced me to confront not just the end of our marriage, but the ways I had abandoned myself long before she did. And maybe that was the real loss, not the woman, but the version of me I had let vanish in the process of loving her. This silence was the worst part. Not the absence of her voice, but the absence of purpose. I'd built my life around Lana. My routines, my goals, even my sense of identity. And now she was gone, replaced by a void so large it swallowed the clock. Days bled into nights. I'd wake up without knowing what day it was, only that it felt heavy. I stopped answering calls. Jared would text me, sometimes swing by with beer and pizza, but I'd never let him in. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain. I didn't even want to exist. I just wanted to not feel anything at all. Work became mechanical. I showed up, nodded, pretended to listen, then went home and collapsed into bed. I ate whatever was in the fridge. I lost weight, my suits hung looser, my eyes developed dark hollows. Once, I walked into a meeting wearing mismatched shoes. No one said anything, but I caught the looks. That night, my manager called me in and asked if I needed time off. I lied and said I was fine. But I wasn't. Everything reminded me of her. The grocery aisle with oat milk. The bench at Grant Park where we once kissed under the fireworks. Even the damn weather. She used to say, autumn made her feel alive. Now, it just made me feel abandoned. One night, after too many drinks, I opened her old Pinterest boards. They were still there. Pages of dream homes, curated mood boards, and quotes about finding your higher path. I laughed bitterly. Higher path, indeed. I was stuck at rock bottom. Then something unexpected happened. Jared invited me to a corporate event his tech startup was hosting. He insisted I come, not for networking, but for a change of scenery. Just show up for the free sliders, he joked. I almost bailed last minute, but something, maybe boredom, maybe inertia, got me to put on a decent shirt and go. And that night, for the first time in months, I felt present, not because of the music or the speeches, but because of one breakout session, a short workshop on negotiation strategy. The speaker was a woman in her 50s, sharp and funny, with a voice that cut through the room like a scalpel. She talked about leverage, posture, and the psychology of belief. But what stuck with me was when she said, the moment you stop asking people to see your worth is the moment you start reclaiming your power. I didn't know why, but those words hit like a switch. After the session, I thanked her. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You've got more going on behind those tired eyes than you think. Don't waste it." It wasn't a miracle cure. I still went home that night and cried. but it was the first time I felt the door crack open, just a little. Over the next week, I found myself thinking about that workshop. I watched videos on negotiation, persuasion, and decision making. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, but it felt better than waiting for her to come back. I cleaned the apartment. I threw out her old books, her throw pillows, her mug that said girl boss. I deleted the shared playlists. I cut my hair. Small things, but each one was a declaration. I'm still here. I also started journaling, not about her, but about me, my ideas, my frustrations, my fears. I wrote like I was speaking to the version of myself I'd forgotten, the one who didn't bend for approval. Each page felt like a step towards someone new, or maybe someone I used to be. One Saturday, I went to the lakefront just before sunrise, something I hadn't done since Lana left. I sat on a bench, watched the horizon blush with color, and for the first time, I didn't think about her. I thought about me. What did I want now? Not 5 years from now, not the old plans. What did I actually want? The answer didn't come in a flash, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to keep surviving. I wanted to start living. That same afternoon, I texted Jared, let's grab coffee. I have some questions about your startup. That was the first real conversation I'd initiated in months. And somehow it felt like lighting a match in a long, dark room. And for the first time in a long while, that idea didn't terrify me, it excited me. Coffee with Jared turned into something more. He had always believed I had an analytical mind, calm under pressure, good with numbers, better with people than I gave myself credit for. As we talked, I shared ideas I'd had during sleepless nights, real estate platforms that use transparency, AI-backed negotiation coaching, even micro-investment tools for renters who wanted to become buyers. Jared leaned in. You know, we've been looking for someone who actually understands housing markets, but isn't just another bro with a crypto pitch. Within a month, I was consulting part-time for his startup. It wasn't glamorous at first, lots of spreadsheets and legal compliance forms, but it was mine. Each task felt like a piece of me returning. I also enrolled in a short-term executive program on strategic investment. Not for the degree, just the knowledge. I started waking up with purpose. The fog lifted. I stopped measuring myself against who I had been with Lana. I wasn't rebuilding to win her back or prove something. I was building because I finally remembered how much I loved creating, thinking, doing. That shift changed everything. People noticed. My posture changed. I spoke with more clarity. Jared's team started bringing me into pitches. I led one for a small urban redevelopment proposal, and we won. That night, Jared threw a rooftop toast. I stood there, drink in hand, overlooking the skyline, the same skyline Lana used to dream about, but this time, it was mine. I also reconnected with people I'd pushed away, my sister, old friends from college, even had a few awkward coffee dates. I wasn't ready for love, but I was ready for conversation, for laughter. And one day, out of nowhere, Lana called. I didn't answer. Her message was brief. Just wanted to say I saw the Forbes piece. I'm proud of you. Hope you're well. She didn't ask for a call back. She didn't mention Mason. I deleted the voicemail. Because what I had now wasn't born from spite. It was born from survival, from rediscovery. I moved into a new apartment, bigger, brighter, mine. I framed a photo of that first pitch win and placed it on my desk. A symbol, not of success, but of return. The return to self. And it felt better than any apology ever could. The company started gaining traction. We secured seed funding, then Series A within 6 months. I wasn't just a name on the deck. I was in the room, shaping the product, pitching to investors, closing deals. The very skills I once thought made me boring, predictability, patience, detail, were now my greatest assets. At one networking event, someone asked what inspired our mission. I smiled and simply said, life teaches you the value of transparency, usually the hard way. People nodded, they understood, maybe not the whole story, but enough to feel the weight behind it. More than the success, what surprised me most was how grounded I felt. Even during chaos, I didn't lose myself. I knew my values now, my boundaries. I had wrestled with the dark and come out clean, not untouched, but clearer. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found a forgotten letter I had written to myself during the worst days. It said, "One day, you'll be grateful she left." I remember writing it, not believing a word. Now I read it with calm conviction because she didn't just leave, she made space. And in that space, I found something better than forgiveness or revenge. I found me. Not long after, Jared and I were invited to speak at a panel about ethical tech in real estate. I was nervous. It was my first time speaking publicly about our journey, but when I stood behind the podium and looked out at the crowd, I felt ready. I shared our philosophy. I told them about the dangers of blind ambition, about the importance of integrity in a world addicted to shortcuts. I didn't name names, didn't throw shade, I just told the truth. After the panel, a young developer came up to me and said, "Thanks for saying what no one else will. I needed to hear that today." I nodded. So did I. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning I could finally call mine. Later that night, walking home under the city lights, I paused at a familiar corner, the one where Lana and I once shared a dream. This time, I stood there alone, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't missing anything. I was exactly where I needed to be. It was supposed to be just another pitch meeting. Our team had been shortlisted for a luxury, mixed-use development in the city's historic district. Prime real estate, high visibility, serious competition. Jared and I arrived early, polished and ready. As we entered the grand conference hall, I scanned the attendee list projected on the welcome screen. My breath caught. One of the competing bids came from a new firm called Rivera Concepts. I didn't need to guess. A few minutes later, I saw them. Mason, looking thinner, hair receding slightly, still trying to ooze confidence in an ill-fitted suit. And beside him, Lana. She looked different. Not just older, harder. The glow she once carried now replaced by a tight smile and eyes that never stopped scanning the room. We locked eyes. She blinked first. The pitch order was alphabetical. They went before us. I watched their presentation from the back of the room. It was flash over substance, dramatic renders, buzzwords, exaggerated projections. Mason gestured wildly while Lana handled the data, her voice clipped, trying to sound authoritative, but their numbers were shaky, their timeline unrealistic. I recognized some of the same tricks from that expose article. When they wrapped up, polite applause followed. Mason gave a smug nod in our direction. Our turn? I stepped forward with a calm I didn't know I had. I introduced our concept, our research-backed strategy, our community-forward design. No gimmicks, just vision, clarity, execution. Jared handled the tech side, I handled the economics. We finished a firm, confident applause and questions, lots of questions, the kind that meant people were listening. Afterward, during the networking session, Lana approached me. "Ethan," she said, her voice was softer than I remembered. "Lana," I nodded. "You look well." Yeah. There was an awkward pause. "We weren't expecting to see you here," she added. "I live here, I build here," I said simply. She glanced at the investors gathering around our team. "Your presentation was impressive." "Yours was ambitious," I replied, careful not to mock. She hesitated. "Things haven't been easy. Mason's had some legal troubles." "I read the court filings," I said. "They're public." Her face fell slightly. I didn't know everything. I was blindsided too. I looked at her, not unkindly, but with a kind of finality. "You made your choice. So did I. She nodded slowly. If things had been different, but they weren't. Before she could say more, one of our potential partners called me over. I excused myself and walked away without looking back. A week later, we got the deal. It was our biggest win yet. Multi-million-dollar valuation, national coverage, a feature in Architectural Digest titled From Collapse to Cornerstone, The Unlikely Rise of Ethan Cole. The headline made me laugh, not because it wasn't true, but because it barely scratched the surface. I wasn't just rising, I was rewriting. And the people who once doubted me, they weren't just watching, they were clapping. I celebrated quietly that night. No champagne, no big party, just Jared and I, a bottle of whiskey, and the city skyline from our new office's rooftop. You know what I love most about this? Jared asked, swirling his glass. Then he's like, you didn't come back to prove her wrong. You came back because you remembered who the hell you are. Smiled. She doesn't even matter anymore. But that wasn't entirely true. She mattered in the way a scar does. Reminder, not wound. The following month, I was invited to speak at a leadership symposium. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What advice would you give your younger self?" I paused, then answered, "Don't ever beg someone to stay. If they can leave, let them. The right people don't need convincing." The audience applauded. Later that day, I got a message on LinkedIn from one of the investors who had declined our earlier pitch 2 years ago. "Ethan, I've been following your journey. If you ever open a second round, I'd love to talk." The irony wasn't lost on me. Doors that once slammed shut were now opening themselves. And I walked through them not as a man who needed validation, but as a man who had already found it. Months later, I found myself walking through a charity gala hosted at the same venue Lana and Mason once paraded through like royalty. This time, I was the one being introduced as a keynote guest. I wore a tailored navy suit, shook hands, gave interviews, and not once did I flinch when someone mentioned her name in passing. Somewhere across the room, I saw her again, alone this time, standing near the silent auction table. Our eyes met. She gave a faint nod. I returned it, respectfully but without emotion. He was no longer a chapter I wanted to revisit, just a name in a story I had already rewritten. I left the gala that night with nothing but my coat and peace of mind. And that, I realized, was the best kind of power. Not revenge, not anger, but indifference that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you deserve. Mason's fall wasn't a blaze, it was a slow unraveling. After losing the development bid, word started spreading, investors became cautious, partnerships dried up, and whispers turned into articles. More lawsuits surfaced, past clients alleging fraud, unpaid contractors filing claims. It wasn't long before his name became synonymous with deception in the local real estate scene. Eventually, the DA filed formal charges for financial misrepresentation, tax fraud, and wire fraud. The arrest was quiet, but the press wasn't. Mugshots replaced headshots. Headlines like "From CEO to Con Man" dominated the feed. Lana disappeared from the spotlight, no press, no public statements, but Jared's cousin worked PR and confirmed she'd quietly resigned from Rivera Concepts 2 weeks before the company formally dissolved. I never cheered for her downfall, but I didn't feel sorry either. A year later, I saw her again at a public housing roundtable. She was sitting in the audience, far from the front. Her hair was pulled back, clothes simpler, demeanor quiet. When I walked past her aisle to take the stage as a speaker, she looked up. This time, I was the one who didn't blink. After the panel, she approached me, no pretense, no small talk. "I lost everything," she said softly. I nodded, I know. I thought I was chasing something real. I looked at her, really looked, and saw no trace of the woman who once dismissed me with a shrug. "You were chasing someone else's illusion," I said. "It happens." She swallowed. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I don't carry anger," I replied. "But I also don't carry you." She blinked rapidly, nodded, and stepped back. There was nothing left to say. She turned and walked away alone. Hire me for mutual acquaintances that she'd taken a job at a small design firm in the suburbs. Quiet work, modest pay. No more big galas, no more visions of empires. Just sketches, blueprints, and deadlines. And maybe that was the just, not published humiliation or downfall, but the simple, inescapable truth that she had to start over, this time without shortcuts. As for Mason, he was sentenced to 5 years with a possibility of parole in 3. Last I heard, he was teaching a business ethics class to fellow inmates. The irony wrote itself. Neither of them reached out again. And I didn't need them to. Because some people don't deserve a place in your future, not because they're evil, but because they taught you everything they could through their absence. Some nights, I'd walk past our old neighborhood, past the cafe where we used to sit, past the condo building that held so many echoes. I no longer avoided those streets. They didn't haunt me anymore. Once, I overheard 2 junior developers chatting at a networking mixer. Did you hear about that firm that got shut down last year? Some guy faked his way into million-dollar deals. The other one laughed. Yeah, classic, always comes back to bite. I smiled to myself and sipped my drink. Time has a way of exposing what ambition tries to bury. Lana and Mason weren't villains in a movie, they were cautionary tales in a real story, the kind no one applauds but everyone remembers. And they had written their endings long before I ever had a say in them. Their fall wasn't mine to celebrate, but my peace, that was mine to keep. Even in their absence, they served a purpose. They reminded me of everything I never wanted to become. Dependent on appearances, detached from truth, chasing validation at any cost. And in that way, maybe they gave me the clearest direction of all. If you had told me 2 years ago that I would thank Lana for leaving, I would have called you crazy. But now I understand. Her departure wasn't the end of my story, it was the start of it. Because when she left, she took with her all the illusions I had about who I needed to be for her, for others, for some version of success that was never mine to begin with. In her absence, I learned how to be present with myself. I learned that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's where healing begins. I learned that ambition without clarity is just chaos, dressed in a power suit. And most of all, I learned that love, real love, never asks you to shrink. These days, my life is quieter, but richer. I wake up with purpose, I work with people I trust, I build things that matter, and every time I walk past a mirror, I recognize the man looking back. I don't hate Lana, I don't miss her either, I hope she finds peace, whatever that looks like for her, but I won't let her back in. Because some doors once closed need to stay that way. Sometimes growth isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to be who you were before the pain. If I could leave one message for anyone going through heartbreak, it's this. Your healing isn't about them, it's about you. It's about reclaiming your narrative, your dignity, your power. Don't waste time waiting for an apology. You don't need one to move on. Your story doesn't end because someone walked out. It begins when you choose to stay standing. And when you finally learn to stand for yourself, you realize you were the soulmate you were searching for all along. A few weeks ago, I was invited to mentor a group of young entrepreneurs. One of them asked, "What do you think matters most in business, vision or resilience?" I smiled. Resilience. Because vision without resilience is just a wish. It felt good to say that out loud. It felt real. And that's what this entire journey has taught me, not just how to survive betrayal, but how to evolve from it. Pain doesn't always leave scars. Sometimes it leaves blueprints. Blueprints for boundaries, blueprints for truth, blueprints for the kind of life you build when no one's watching and you're no longer performing. I've stopped chasing the next thing, the next title, the next validation. Success, I've realized, is waking up at peace with who you are. Some mornings I still think about what might have been, But those thoughts don't sting anymore. They pass like clouds, acknowledged, then gone. As the truth is, I didn't lose her. I found me. There's no comparison. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing because every broken promise, every sleepless night, every insult disguised as advice was a brick in the foundation of who I've become. And now, with both feet grounded and both eyes open, I walk forward, not needing to prove anything, not seeking closure, but owning my truth fully, finally, unapologetically. And the best part, I'm just getting started. There's a quiet power in rebuilding, in knowing you faced the worst day of your life and still found a way to smile again. That strength doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention, it simply is. And now I carry it with me every day, in every room I walk into.